So we talked in depth about epithelial tissue or the epithelium, and we talked in depth about connective tissue. Now, we are not going to go in as much detail in muscle and nervous tissue in this lesson because we have multiple lessons where we're talking about muscle tissue and muscle contraction, and the same thing for nervous tissue and the way impulses are sent. So this will just be a general introduction to the tissues, and we'll get more into it later in the semester. So what we need to know now and understand about muscle tissue is that we have three types, that they are excitable and they can contract. So they have protein fibers that can contract these cells. The three types that we have pictured there are skeletal, that's letter A, smooth is represented by letter B, and cardiac is represented by letter C. Now, skeletal muscle fibers or skeletal muscle tissue is going to make up our skeletal muscles. Therefore, these are voluntary, right? If I want to move my arm, if I want to take a step, these are voluntary actions. Now, I want you to spend some time looking at this image and look at the image in your textbook. What is true about skeletal muscle, let me just turn my pen on here, is that, so these, if you look, these are long cylindrical muscle fibers or muscle cells. And notice these dark spots along here, these are nuclei. So they're multinucleated, meaning there's more than one nucleus in a skeletal fiber or a skeletal muscle cell. And the other thing that's important is you can't maybe see it in this presentation, but there are what we call striations, okay? So it's sort of a striping look to the muscle tissue because of the presence of different contractile protein filaments or protein fibers. So we call that striated muscle. And if we look at smooth muscle, okay, these are going to be what we call spindle shaped. So they're skinnier at the end and they get fatter in the middle, okay? So this is typical shape of, I made that really fat, but the shape of smooth muscle. Now it's smooth because we don't see any of that striation, and it's involuntary. So if we think about where do we find smooth muscle, so for example in your digestive system, the contractions of your smooth muscle, which we call peristalsis, is what's helping to move your food through. You don't have to think about that, right? That's happening involuntarily. So in A&P2, when you get into the details of the digestive system, you'll learn more about how that smooth muscle works to move your food through the digestive system. Cardiac muscle is what's shown in the third image there. And what I want you to see is these are going to have some branching. So we see branching occurring, okay, where we have these cells branching. Now, these cells have typically one nuclei per cell, so it's not like the skeletal muscle fibers. They're going to have one nucleus per cell. They are also going to have the striation pattern, so they're striated. But like smooth muscle, the cardiac muscle or cardiac tissue is what we find in our heart. We don't have to think about, okay, heart, it's time for you to beat, it's time for you to contract, right? These are involuntary muscles. All right, nervous tissue. So these are excitable. These are responsible for sending and receiving electrochemical messages in our bodies. And we have two general types of cells that make up nervous tissue. The first is the neuron. This is the cell that's sending and receiving the electrical signals. We call those action potentials. And the other type is called neuroglia. These are supporting cells that, as we talk about the nervous system, we'll learn all of the functions that these neuroglia have to support the neurons. But a neuron is going to have this main central part called the cell body where the nucleus is found. And then typically there is going to be an axon, okay, that extends from the cell body. This is the portion that sends the signal. And then we have multiple extensions called dendrites that are responsible for receiving electrical signal input. So we can see an example here of nervous tissue. So these cells here are the neurons, and you can see their darker nucleus there in the cell body. So for now, these are the important things for us to know about muscle tissue and nervous tissue. In lesson 5, we will in lab take a look at some histology of these two tissues. So in lesson 4, we really focused on epithelial tissue and connective tissue. In lesson 5, we'll look at some histology of nervous and muscle tissue. Then as we go through the semester, we'll have specific chapters covering muscle and nervous tissue.